Molly. Oh. I know that Molly had wanted me to just mention how I kind of see this going or unfolding today. And really, if you have something like burning that you want to share or say, feel free to interrupt me or just kind of mention something, but definitely also put it in the chat. I'll try to do my best to keep an eye on the chat as you are. As I'm going through the presentation, and I'm totally okay with people putting things in the chat and trying to during my presentation, sometimes I try to ask questions. So, definitely put it in the chat. And, I would love for you to be engaged and to hear what you have to say or what some of your experiences have been, because it has been quite an experience, hasn't it? I think we have mostly educators in here, right? Am I wrong, or is it like a more diverse group of experiences? Or okay, wonderful. So that's great, and thank you so much for this turnout. I don't think I've ever had 40 people attend anything I've ever said, so like done or presented. So this is wonderful to have this, and I'm looking forward to hearing your experiences as well. So I will now just go ahead and share my PowerPoint with you. Um, and then I will go ahead and get started. So I'm so used now to like how this all works because I have to do this like with my classes. So I'm like, I got to make sure the PowerPoint's up before I can share it. Like it's just like, oh, the weird things about my computer. Okay, so are you able to see it? Just want to make sure everyone can see it, hear me.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Um, so I chose to share my experiences on how I've helped my students explore their trauma and stressors in especially in this time. So I am going to first talk about why I included this approach in my curriculum. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the activity that I created. That's was like a guided activity on trauma, stress, and learning, in which the students had engaged with. And I'll share a little bit of about what they said. I'm not going to share their verbatim answers, but I will like kind of paraphrase what they had said. And then I'll talk about what I added to my course. So the different plans and initiatives that I included based on the feedback that I had gotten from them. And then just end with an analysis of this approach and a discussion, hopefully, just to hear what your experiences have been with your students. And could you possibly see this trauma informed approach unfolding in what you do as educators? Because I do think that this could be applicable across settings, whether it's STEM or it's social sciences or it's the arts, it's whatever. So I really think that this could be useful as educators to kind of help as we go through together with the students what is has been even more stressful in terms of a term. So why did I include this approach? So the first thing I obviously have to do is shout out my institution. So, the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Assessment at IUK and partners with Academic Affairs every term. And what they do is they hold a faculty and staff retreat. And the August 2020 retreat was because we couldn't be in person, it was an online webinar pre-recorded of Immad's trauma-informed pedagogy, which I kind of refer to as TIP too. So while we were watching the presentation, we had some time for reflection and really kind of thinking about, now that we've heard this, what would we like to do? And so we were prompted to think about who our students are. How do we get to know them? How do we understand them? How do we understand what they're going through, what they're feeling? And is it similar to what we're feeling and what we're going through? Is there actually this kind of common humanity that we might see? And then how do we keep our students from disengaging? So I'm going to talk a little bit, just from what I learned from the trauma informed approach of how students may disengage if they are overwhelmed by their trauma and stressors, whether it's from COVID or not. And how can we recognize that and help them be ready to learn? How do we teach the lonely, the fearful, the broken? And then share a strategy to implement in the fall, which is what I'm going to share with you today, and how that aligns with that trauma informed pedagogy. So we were asked, is this similar to how we are feeling, in terms of what our students are going through and the stress and trauma? I'm sure that everyone has gone through some kind of significant stress. And we'll talk about stress and trauma and how they are actually kind of processed similarly. But I'm sure everyone since March of 2020, probably even a little bit before that, has had some significant experience that was stressful and probably impacted their work. So I mean, I am one of them. And so I also have experienced this. So I normally, so I suffer tremendously from anxiety. And so I also kind of understand where a lot of them are coming from when they kind of feel like sometimes they have this like crippling anxiety and it really impacts their ability to do their work. So I have a really personal connection to this approach and it really stuck out to me. So that's kind of why I fit it into my curriculum. And then ultimately, like if there's anything to take away in terms of all the kind of bigger terms that we learned in the trauma informed approach with the students, they're feeling both physiological and emotional stress. And that stress is going to, like, at a cognitive level, impact how they learn and engage. So, specifically, sense rewards and their ability to attain rewards. So for instance, if they feel like they're in control of their stress, so stress is inevitable. I think we could probably all agree on that one. But it's how we balance it. And if we can balance it, we have a better shot at engaging and learning in our teaching and learning environment. But if they are so overwhelmed that they can't process information and their body, their brain is sensing it as danger and a lack of control, then they're going to disengage. They're not going to learn. And so I always think about this song whenever I am thinking about trauma informed pedagogy, but to everything there is a season, right? And there is this balance. We have this balance in life. We have to, even though it can be really hard at times trying to take the good with the bad. And when I was listening to Imad's approach, I was like, you know what? This reminds me so much as a educator and someone in health sciences of that emotional regulation and how we have to work towards emotional regulation. It doesn't just happen easy for us. And some of us don't really have as good of coping mechanisms as other people. And then that puts certain people at a disadvantage. So, how can we help these students balance and recognize their stressors and their responses to them and address them, while also reminding ourselves of the balance in our lives? How can we grant ourselves and our students or others grace to process this? Because it does take time. Could this help our teaching and learning? Even just in the last week, so the song talks about like seasons, but I'm like, day to day, it's just like week to week, it's like extreme emotion to another, especially within this pandemic on top of our regular life stressors. I mean, I had wonderful news last week. I was like so happy from like Wednesday to Friday. And then like last night, I got absolutely crushing, devastating news. So it's just been a whirlwind. And I've had, I mean, someone like, I think like I lost my wallet was lost or stolen like a couple weeks ago at the grocery store. So that was like another added stress. So these things are all happening as we're trying to like teach and learn. So what can we, do here? How can we recognize these and try to balance ourselves and control or regulate our emotions and offer the grace for others to do this as well? So I just want to check the chats because I see some chats coming in. Um, okay. Okay. So um I feel traumatized and stressed both. Yep. So I'll talk a little bit about those. But yeah, I'm really hoping to hear what you all are also feeling during this presentation in a little bit more detail. So I know this is like our coffee hour, and I actually have my coffee too. So we can definitely chat about this. I will get through this presentation hopefully pretty quickly, and we could talk through it. Um, Graduated with your doctorate. Oh, awesome. Congratulations. And yep, wonderful. It was on PTSD and trauma and risk factors. So you, Pamela, probably have a sense of you probably already know a lot of what I'm going to talk about. So definitely feel free to share that as well. Okay. So what did I do to try to address this? Um sorry, I've got a bunch of things like up in my window now, and so many things are popping up now I can't move it. Ah, okay. One moment, sorry. It is really hard to like navigate all the stuff with Zoom and move things around. Sorry about that. Okay, now I think I'm sorted. Um, so what I did was I created a two-part activity for my students. And this was in the fall of 2020. I also, included it in the spring. Oh, I am showing slides. Can you not see them, Natalia? No? Uh-oh.
Uh,
Can-
I can see them.
yeah,
Okay.
I see the guided activity,
Yes.
trauma,
Yeah.
and then you have flipped to the next one a couple of times. So I
Okay.
don't, so
Yeah,
some of
but
us can see them.
okay. I'm sorry, Natalia. I don't know what's going on. um, so I mean, I could try to like reshare it. I'm not sure. Um, but if it's still not working, just let me know. Um, okay. So in the fall of 2020, I was teaching um a 100 level class, a 300 and a 400 level class. And so I'm going to kind of break down like how it might have been easier to do in some classes over others. But the first part was about them exploring physiological and emotional responses to their trauma and stressors. And then the second part involved them sharing ideas for balancing their emotional responses, just to get them to say, like, or think and make them know that I understand that there is going to be stress. There's going to be significant stress this term. What are we going to do to try to address this? And these screenshots are just kind of from my module online. Um, and so the first part was actually a 15-minute guided online lecture activity, which I'm going to break down here. And so the first part is where I asked them about their physiological impact of traumatic experiences. And I basically just kind of summarize and talk about what trauma is here. And I think a lot of the times people will think that trauma has to be like this violent, abusive event. But really, it is all about how we experience or interpret a situation and the extent or severity in which we perceive that. So, trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that's experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening. So they perceive it as threatening. And then and that lasting adverse effects, so there are these kind of adverse effects as well on the individual's functioning, and physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So right there it says that there it is based in an experience that was interpreted by this person, and there are lasting effects from this. um were these content based? Oh, what were the courses? Okay, I'm sorry. So my first course was the 100 level was a freshman learning course. It's called Introduction to Health and Fitness, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And then I also teach cultural competence in health education, which is a 300 level. These are all health sciences core, bachelor's health sciences core classes. And then health program planning. So those are my 400 levels and students I've had multiple times. So a lot of this unpacking of stress and traumatic experiences happened more organically in those upper level classes. The thing to remember about trauma is that it shows itself consciously or unconsciously. We might recognize it, we might not. So that's another reason why it's important to maybe prompt our students to kind of think through this. Um, and so our experiences just within this pandemic and even outside of it can be considered. And so, what I asked them to do was take a moment as they were going through this guided video lecture to note a few ways in which stress and trauma recently has affected them. And I say it could be related to the COVID-19 pandemic or it might not be. And I will talk a little bit about what they said too. I go on to share how we are perceiving, and then this leads to emotions and behaviors and impacts on our health outcomes. So I just talk a little bit about how our perceptions are going to impact our nervous system and our physiological responses. And this goes back to what I was saying before, where, and this is very like basic, by the way, like there's a lot more intense science behind this, but I was just very kind of trying to be very clear and concise with them because they'd probably disengage if it wasn't. But I just said, if the brain senses danger, and it doesn't mean danger in terms of like you feel like physical harm is coming. It's like, I don't know how to like do this assignment. Like I don't know what's being asked of me, so I'm just going to put this off. It could be as simple as that. But if it senses reward, it will engage. They're more likely to engage. And this, I mean, when we talk about transparency in teaching and learning, this is actually part of it, where the more transparent we are, the more likely they are to kind of do what they're going to do because they know what we want. So how can trauma affect our body? I talk a little bit about that. They might feel fatigue. They might experience hormone imbalance. And then the longer term issues might be the narrowing of arteries, which is related to heart disease, um, diabetes, so the increase in blood glucose or blood sugar, decreased nutrient absorption. And so, really, trauma can be stored in our body. So we have to recognize our stress and trauma and address it. Otherwise, it just kind of compounds. And then I will talk a little bit later about some of my students' experiences. But it's going to manifest itself in a panic attack or, in other like really scary ways for them. So I asked them to add their notes on how they've responded physically to the experiences they noted in that previous slide. Then I go into how can or does trauma and stress affect their learning. So, I mean, Imad goes into this in such great detail. And so, what I did was I just kind of, summarized it again. But ultimately, what I kind of go into is how our brains respond to stress and then how that is then in turn going to affect our learning. So, talking a little bit about the rational brain and the emotional brain, how these can become imbalanced. When our amygdala senses the danger or stress and trauma, our hypothalamus releases cortisone and adrenaline. So, just these kind of basic processes that happen at a physiological level that they might not recognize. But what they do notice from that stress response is probably their impaired ability to make decisions, to pay attention, to remember, to learn, to think. And that is going to, in turn, affect their ability to do their work and learn in this environment and even just think that they can do it. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but and if we even go into marginalized our minority students that are experiencing additional stressors, we're already seeing from the pandemic larger gaps in disparities, whether it's health disparities or socioeconomic disparities as well for like marginalized and minority populations. So there that group is even more vulnerable. So we want to keep our emotional brain as best as we can from taking over and producing that stress response. So that's kind of where I go into starting to unpack what this could look like. And I really loved her example, Ahmad's example of like just take a look at this word graphic. What words can you relate to and how and why? So these were all words that when people describe the pandemic, like what they said, and the larger words are ones that were said more often. And so I'll talk a little bit about what they had said too. But you see those bigger words are like family, future, uncertainty, students, knowing, online, things like that. So these were those kind of bigger words that a lot of people identified with. And then I then asked them to share how they've responded, like physically and emotionally. So the emotions, behaviors that might have taken over due to their trauma and stress that they shared. And I just said, you can choose some of these on the slide, or you can or you can just talk about what you've experienced in general. It doesn't have to be specific to this chart. And so we'll talk a little bit about what they said in a moment. But what I then asked them to do was, after they've gone through that guided lecture, was respond to the following questions here. So, how has stress and trauma recently affected them? How have they responded? And what words did they relate to on that word association graphic? And what emotions and behaviors have taken over? So basically, here I just say, just what basically what we went through in terms of the guided activity, just put it down so I can read it and you submit it. So what did they say? Okay, and here's what I do want to mention to you is I think we have some like regional campuses here. And we tend to have some non-traditional students. And so again, when we think about those students that may have additional like stressors on top of, the normal daily stressors and like the pandemic stressors, um, single parents or the non-traditional parents. Some of them were furloughed, they lost their job. So some of that additional stress in addition to COVID-19. So our non-traditional students, I like in term just anecdotally for me, what I was very worried about them. I, was also worried about my marginalized students who identified with a marginalized or minority population. Um, some of my students had also mentioned that they had to experience sickness and death of a loved one, some due to COVID, some due to the pandemic. Um, their uncertainty regarding their education as well. What ways had stress and trauma affected them? They had difficulty staying motivated and focused. They talked about being scared for their family member with pre-existing conditions. Um, I talked about balance before. What I particularly like think is good that came out of this pandemic is our how these health terms like pre-existing conditions, and I mean there isn't a perfect understanding of health obviously, and just in terms of how we've responded to COVID, but people are learning about, oh, pre-existing conditions and all these other ways in which we can be healthy. But when they got this knowledge, now they were like, oh my gosh, I'm scared because we don't know about this disease. We don't know what it's doing, what it's going to do to my family who a family member who has pre-existing conditions. Their sleep schedule was off. I actually shared this too. I experienced that as well. And then sometimes there was actually some students, this wasn't all the time, but I wanted to share it anyway, is that some like used it as motivation. But I will say that these students were probably the more traditional students that maybe had a little bit more support. So I don't want to say that everyone was able to like pull themselves up by their bootstraps and just kind of truck through this. That's probably less of an example of how people had reacted. um so how have they responded physically? Just being tired and drained before even doing anything. They felt fatigued, they felt sluggish, they felt disengaged, was another thing they had said. What words did they relate to? So they said students because they were struggling as students. They friends and online stuck out to them because they said that's how they stayed connected. Stress stuck out to them because they were worried about their loved ones, about themselves. Uncertainty about the future, about attending college. So some of them were like, I don't even know if I'll be able to go to college. They just didn't know, back in March and even over the summer. So having that loss of control as well was something that was really affecting them. And then also home and family. So with this, it was like this was where and who they spent the most time with. And this, as we could probably guess, could be both good and bad. So sometimes they were like, and it was too much. And then sometimes people were like, well, it was great to have that additional time with them. What emotions and behaviors had taken over? Many of them were upset and rightfully so. Some of them are like, my senior year was taken from me. I didn't get to like experience graduation. I didn't get to I practiced all year for this competition and the competition was canceled. So they were upset that they couldn't show their hard work from an event or achievement that they were looking forward to. They had decreased concentration and motivation, feelings of hopelessness, mild depression, irritability, trouble with eating, some experiences of low self esteem, feeling emotionally overwhelmed, and a lot of overthinking and anxiety resulted as well. So I didn't stop there. I was like, okay, now that we've talked about this, we've learned more about ourselves. Our goal is to shift our apprehension and uncertainty, which we know is inevitable. These feelings are inevitable, but how can we shift them to feelings of hope in order to enhance our ability and desire to get through this term in a balanced way? So I asked them and I gave them some resources. From SAMHSA. And then in the next slide, I'll show you the 6 guiding principles to a trauma informed approach so that they could like get some ideas from that. And then so this is an example of the guiding principles. So there's safety, so feelings of safety, and what the some recommendations to like foster that feeling of safety is invite conversation, talk about what their feeling of safety would be in that situation. Trustworthiness and transparency. Ahmad talks about kind of wearing your heart on your sleeve and being kind of open and honest with them as well and encouraging that from them. And again, this might not fit with a lot of professors, personalities or pedagogy, right? So this might not fit for everyone. Um, their peer support. So storytelling, and I will share kind of how we did that in a moment. So just that kind of get a sense of common humanity. Collaboration. So kind of asking them, what do they want to learn? How could this kind of unfold in the course to kind of share that power? And then empowerment. So, how can we kind of give them a voice in the course too, and then address any cultural, historical, or gender issues. And I will say, so I talked about it before, how people who are maybe identify with historically oppressed, marginalized minority population are experiencing more stressors. We're seeing more disparities, especially in terms of this pandemic. But this was a lot harder to address, and it was difficult to address. One, because my classes aren't very diverse. And I don't know if they maybe necessarily felt comfortable, or even maybe felt completely comfortable with me being like, this is how I felt about like George Floyd, or this is how I felt about, these other things that were happening in our society and political climate at that time, during this time. So then I asked them, what goals do you have? It could be personal, it could be academic. What do you need to manage your emotions and enhance your hope? So what do you hope to kind of do to make sure that this happens? And what are you willing to do to support this course and the participants at this time? So, what were some of their goals? They were wanted to be more open and outgoing. So a lot of the freshmen wanted to do this. Um, they wanted to make the dean's list. They wanted to be accepted into certain academic programs, whether it was like maybe nursing or rad sci, or get into a graduate program. They wanted to turn in their work on time. They wanted to gain better time management skills. They wanted to get through the term safely. They wanted to be physically healthy. Some wanted to become more familiar with technology. So I think some of them realized, ooh, I don't know maybe as much as maybe what I need to know to be successful at this time. And then some were like, I just want to work on my positivity and have fun. Um, so they wanted to do, in order to do this, they wanted to explore new ways to manage stress. Some were like, I need to get a planner and plan ahead. So I talked with them about like planning, I published the module at the beginning of the week. How are you gonna, you look at that at the beginning of the week, and then you make your plan. I give you everything you have to do that week. So that might be helpful. Um, they want to hold themselves accountable. They didn't want to procrastinate, and they talked about prioritizing their schedules and their work. They knew that in order to reach their goals, they had to take care of their selves or their body. And they knew that they wanted to ask for help. And so I asked, okay, what are we willing to do here? So they were like, I will participate in class conversations. I will talk to my peers if they need to talk about anything. I'll help my peers with materials and time management or scheduling. Show people we are in this together. Socially distance. This one I really loved. Read the syllabus and ask questions. They said that they would do that. And then just be calm and patient. And that's also something that I talk about that I also had to actively do as well. So, what did I do? What else did I do? So, again, I did practice patience with students and with myself. I constantly reevaluated their progress and would adjust course due dates outline in the course outline if I needed to. And I'll say we fit everything in, but sometimes things needed to be adjusted. So just allowing also multiple submissions after feedback, allowing late submissions. This, not gonna lie, it is a little bit more work. Not every student takes advantage of it, but for those who do and can, um, they will take advantage of it. And so It is a little bit more work, and like I said, it might not be for everyone because, as we know, we're trying to balance our lives as well. And then just emotional regulation, helping them with that. So reminding them to think about their goals, give them class time to practice stress management and exercise. This is specifically more so for those 100 level students. And then give them class time to reflect on their needs, both basic and course needs, and ask questions. What I did in my freshman learning course, we have, and this is from our other freshman learning courses, a what's called like a wayfinding module. So these modules were created by Christina, I think Christina Downey in academic affairs, and it goes through kind of like for freshmen everything they need to know about like staying on top of things in terms of their academic career, like the student engagement roster that we have, or their GPA, how is it calculated, how can they talk to their advisor, things like that. So I included those as like optional, but I will say a lot of them did it and they learned a lot. I also did a high and low discussion. So what I did was at the beginning of each class, they shared their highs and lows from the past week at the beginning of the class with the person next to them or people next to them. And then as a group, we discussed it. And so the first day that we did this, I had asked them, okay, raise your hand if it was a lot easier for you to find the negative, like the low, than it was the high. And a majority of them raised their hand that it was a lot easier to think of the low than it was to think of the high. And I was like, well, it's common. That's human behavior. We have that negative distortion where think of when we get feedback as academics, we'll get all this wonderful feedback. And then there's this one comment or critique that's not even that bad. And that's what we fixate on. They do it too. We do it as humans. And so what I told them was, what I want you to try to do is, eventually be able to think about them, as evenly, or be able to identify your high more, quicker than your low, to try to balance and emotionally regulate. And I can say that once the term went on, I kept asking them, and a lot of them had mentioned, the majority were like, I was able to identify my high before my low. So what we did, we didn't just stop there. We help them through the lows, right? As a group, as a professor, as their peers. We celebrated the highs with them. So like their lows were like just maybe study skills. So they were like, oh gosh, I did so bad on my anatomy lab or my anatomy test. And so we were like, okay, like what are you going to do moving forward? So maybe helping them cope with anxiety, study skills, any personal issues that they had. I mean, this is like their low could be it was something like maybe like, oh, I'm training my dog and it's just a nightmare, to I got in a car accident and I'm trying to deal with that. I have a family member who's in the hospital. We don't know if they're going to make it. I mean, that was the scope of their lows. And then we celebrated the highs as a group. So we'd be like snaps for so and so, or we'd like clap for them, congratulate them if like they were like, oh, I'm doing so much better in sociology or something like that. So I also shared my struggles with them too, like my highs and lows. And that was really good because it helped them kind of realize it was okay to reach out for me if they need anything. And they did. I helped multiple students with like some academic issues, whether was related to like the administrative stuff, like something was wrong with their financial aid, to I can't register for this class. I'm having a problem in this class. I don't know if the professor understands me. So it was all over the place, but we kind of work through it. So, using the principles of the trauma informed pedagogy approach, What did we do here? Did I create or try to create a safe environment? So these were from, so I just did the FAR, my faculty annual review. Actually, it's not quite done yet, but don't, my dean knows, don't worry. I did start, I put my teaching comments together. So my student evaluations, and they had shared, I just share here some of the comments, because I was like, oh gosh, I hope it worked. Now in terms of like what's asked of them on the student evaluations, um they are just basically asked, what did you like about this course? Like, what was your favorite part pretty much about it, or the best parts, and what could be done to improve? And then what did you like about the instructor, or what feedback do you have? So I did not say, what did you think about the highs and lows? I didn't say any of that. I didn't say, what did you think about a safe environment? What did you think about collaboration and choice? So this is some of their feedback that they shared. So for creating a safe environment, one student was like, I was really nervous, but it helped me, with my self-image. I wasn't comfortable working out in front of people. Now I can do it. And I love being able to exercise with different equipment. And so I don't know if it's this student, but I did have one student who was like really nervous about being in an exercise course, and she had confided in me about some issues with anxiety, and I was like, I get it. And she did like a 180 by the end of the class, and it was just so wonderful to see. um Enhanced collaboration and choice. So the student said, I liked how involved students were able to be with their assignments, so practicing their workouts, doing their pre and post evaluation, the module structures and flexibility of when they needed to do the assignment. So the P120, this is from P120, and that was structured as a hybrid course because of how many students I had. And so there was the online lecture, and then when we were in the classroom environment, we would do the highs and lows and do their wellness program. They liked being able to make their own wellness goals, having the time to work on them during the class, creating routine and consistency. We always started class by talking about the highs and lows, to bond more with our classmates. That was another thing that I tried to do, was even though we did have to make adjustments throughout the term, keep some things very routine and consistent. And then creating a sense of community and engagement through peer and instructor support. So, having that open platform for communication and discussion, it gave every student a chance to speak if they wanted to. My professor was helpful. I liked how the class was set up despite having to adjust to the COVID rules. I liked that classmates would provide advice on the struggles that we had. Another student said, my overall favorite part was the simple activity that we completed at the beginning of each class. The highs and lows allowed us to share about our struggles and accomplishments throughout the week. And if there was something that we stated for our low and we needed advice, the class and the professor were always willing to pitch in ideas. And it was honestly very helpful. Um, so just to kind of summarize this, I do know. So the challenge is fitting something like this into your curriculum when you've only got a certain amount of time. Um, and and the other thing is, that paradox of this being like potential assignments, where is if it becomes an assignment, it could become a stressor. So it's about, trying to be as informal as possible, and sometimes maybe getting feedback. But the benefits, what I really saw here was the importance of addressing their basic needs and their stress to facilitate their learning. I don't share my grades with other people, my students with other people, but I don't think I had one student fail. I helped them work through a lot of their issues. Um in our program, if they get like a C or below in a core class, they have to retake the class. And so there were some students that like were like not wanting to push through. And I was like, look, here's the deal. Like there's this issue. You either do these assignments or you may have to take the class again. And so just really kind of pushing them and being in their corner um really I think helped there. Um so again, just to kind of reiterate, I really think that this is important, maybe specifically for our maybe like socioeconomic SES students, um, non-traditional students, any students that identify with the minority marginalized population. I think it's particularly important that they get the help that they need with this, because we are seeing these disparities widening in the midst of the pandemic. And so, I don't know if other people have kind of have similar experiences there, but at this point, if anyone has any other practices or adjustments to the current ideas that might help all students as we try to get through this crummy season right now, in spite of everything. And then just any other questions or comments that you might have. Um, the chat, I see like there was a lot in the chat kind of going through, but if anyone would like to kind of talk about that, those were kind of my discussion points is could you see this trauma informed approach in your class, and then what might be some challenges or benefits of trying to fit it in maybe to your curriculum, and then just any questions or comments you might have, I'm happy to address.
I kind of share. We did research on trauma and coping, and everything you're talking about is absolutely what we saw in our data. So you are spot on. What I'm doing in class, the first class I had the students, if they wanted to share, talk about how COVID had affected their life. And I had one student who was in intensive care for 6 days. Now she has long-term problems. I had several lost grandparents.
Yep.
People had gotten COVID. It was shocking how much this affected their lives and their family. Then after that, I use Poll Everywhere. So I give them questions like, what helped you get through this week? And then another one would be, where are you feeling challenged? And it's anonymous, but they get to see how everybody else is feeling, and nobody has to divulge who they are. I found giving them that time to vent or talk, because they'll volunteer information about, I had COVID and this happened, and then I can start stats. But if I didn't do this, I don't think mentally they would be ready. I found that this is therapeutic for them.
Yeah, and I think it helps with that emotional regulation and just creating that sense of common humanity. Like, okay, I'm not the only one going through this. I think too, because they compare themselves. And then Mary, you're nursing, so I know that they're really competitive and trying, right? Yeah, you're nursing, right?
Yes, they're
So
very.
so they're always comparing themselves, right? In that so that's what, so to create that sense of common humanity, I think was maybe really helpful.
Yeah, and they are. I teach graduate students, and they're frontline workers, so they weren't going home and talking to family. They were bottling it up. So to see it come out and so honest and raw, that was good for them, and it was good to help them, because graduate stats is very difficult. So I need them to be in a good space before I start. So
yeah, I also that was helpful too, is like getting them to be in a good space and thinking positive. I'm just kind of looking at some of the chat comments here. There were a lot, so I apologize. There's like a conversation kind of happening here, but I like bringing up the idea of, we don't have a lot of time in all of our classes to do this. I didn't do this to the same extent, like the highs and lows with like all like to the same extent in all of my classes. It really just kind of depended on the environment, the class environment. Sometimes it was online. I've done the highs and lows online, and it went pretty well because they would use the chat box. And we could it went surprisingly well. I thought I was gonna like just hear crickets, but it went really well. So thinking of like, can I do this online in an online discussion? It might not be as impactful, um, or you might not think it's as impactful, but there's still a way to maybe do it in a synchronous and even asynchronous way, if we have limited time, like face to face too, I think. Um, I
I'm going to steal your highs and lows. I think that'll be this Thursday. I'll do that one. I love that one. I think that would be good for them.
I mean, we just tend to think of the like negative first, right? And so if we can kind of help them with balancing that out, it might be helpful, for them. And I noticed that it was really helpful. Um my upper level students, I don't know if it's cuz I knew them more and maybe they felt like they could talk to me more, but they were dealing with a lot of stuff. And I don't know if it's because they're about to graduate or what. Um, and one of them was non-traditional, so she suffered tremendous loss in the fall, but she still managed to get through it. And so I don't. So I mean, I don't know if that these different levels, like from freshman to senior, they could be are experiencing different stressors, but that was another interesting thing that I found too. Um I'm kind of going all the way back up to the top here. So studies that show that female staff and faculty will be more exposed to emotional labor, um reflects the gender norms. There's yeah, okay, we got mostly females. Um How can we discuss reaching more equity and responding to student trauma? That's a really good point of discussion. Um, I don't know if anyone has any ideas, um, in that, and even students. So to Diane's point, that students may expect females to be more understanding, than males too. Um, Yeah. So, I mean, those are good points. If anyone has any thoughts on that, like,
I do. Hi.
hi.
Sorry, I always like to talk.
No, I appreciate it. It's
I've been just
helpful because
chatting up a
I'm
storm.
like trying to go through the chat and it's so hard to go back. So I
Well,
appreciate it.
on our campus, we started last spring, started talking with each other about how to help our students. And, some of the stuff you've talked about, the additional labor in reaching out to students, changing policies, allowing late work, it is more labor. And I
Yeah.
think I've been reaching out more than I ever do. I've cried with students in Zoom sessions, listening to some of the stuff, and it has impacted my course evals. My numbers are higher than they ever have been, and a lot of their comments had to do with my empathy. And studies show that if a student connects with one person on a campus, it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
faculty, it can be a staff member, then our retention rate goes up with that student. We know that.
Right.
Um, but the discussion about trying to figure out what to do to get more men nurturing, I think that goes way beyond what we could do. But I think
And
if we just keep putting that conversation forward in every meeting I'm in, that we have an opportunity. I mentioned that about reaching out to students because they will reach back.
yeah, and it doesn't have to be like that you're and I always I talk about actually empathy with my students in cultural competence, how it does it's one way is to sit and talk with them, but showing empathy isn't a matter of like I've got to carve out an hour a day to sit with my students. There's so many ways in which we could show empathy that don't involve like or that might be more like just even showing that you understand where they're coming from and granting them a little bit of grace, like the students appreciate that and they can see that as empathetic, and that might be more in line with what a professor is willing to do than maybe another professor. So that's why I said before, I'm like, I am aware that we're all going through this, and this might not be something that it fits with like certain people's like time and ability and personality to do this. And I'm very clear that like it's my choice to do this, and it's not something that should kind of be expected
Mm.
as well, because I know that women academics are expected to be like like even subconsciously to be more like attentive and spend more time like nurturing, and which is also not okay, because some may not want to do that, right? And we have then more expectations than our male colleagues because of that. So that's why I was like, but I think it's a really good point to bring up, like what are the little ways in which we can do this, um kind of show empathy like you were saying, and help them with the emotional regulation that might not be overbearing or anything like that. So
True. I mean, in a face-to-face classroom or a synchronous online, they can see our empathy. In an 100% online, they may not. And I've been using audio feedback since fall of 2018, so pre-COVID. And I've just ramped it up a little bit because I'm even more empathetic when I'm talking with students, because I know what circumstances they've been going through if they've shared them with me. So I'm able to put that in my feedback, and they can hear how I care about them.
mhm.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's excellent. Very good.
yeah.
In interest of time, it's coming on the half hour. So I just want to thank everyone for participating. I know I've come away with a few trauma-informed pedagogy tips that I want to try to enact in my classes for this situation. Let's have you everyone go down to the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and go up and let's give Angela a virtual round of applause with our
Thank you.
clapping hands for such a wonderful job sharing this conversation topic with us. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to like there were some really good points about it not just being on the professor and being on the institution too. So like I'm all
Absolutely.
about that discussion as well. So if we want to have a follow-up discussion
We'll
or
look into
anything like
that.
that,
Absolutely. We'll look
just
into that. So
just let
just
me
a
know.
few, sure,
Yeah.
just a few quick reminders, folks, before you start going on to your next item of business for the day. Through LEAP Indiana, we want to remind you of some upcoming sessions. March 16th will be our second discussion for the Small Teaching Online book read. March 19th, we're co-sponsoring with Ball State University the Faculty Summit, which will be an excellent day. And then our next coffee hour, fourth Monday in March, will be March 22nd, where we'll be talking about the adapting of the value rubrics. So if you have time to pencil in some of these upcoming events, please do so. LEAP Indiana is here to support you and as many needs as we can for you in your teaching endeavors. So on behalf of LEAP Indiana and Rachel Karch, who's my co-chair for programming, thank you all for participating, and we hope that you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Loved it.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
It was
Nice
great.
job.
So is Rachel?